Hey everybody, how's it going? It's me, Jim Harrold. Hey, I thought this week during week 8 I would do something a little different, and I just shoot a video of myself talking for a few minutes instead of doing the PowerPoint presentation. Um, I actually had this idea while I was walking around Exarban Village the other day. I'll get to that in just a second. So this week, week 8, I gave you some readings that really are more of a practical follow-on to the Agronoff readings on collaboration from week 7. Originally, when I designed this course, in fact, when I did it in 2018, I had students read more chapters of Agronoff. But I thought I'd stop with the 3 chapters or so of Agronoff that I had you read. You can certainly go get the book; it's in the library, and actually, Agronoff has a couple newer books about collaboration at the local government level that you might be interested in. But I wanted to take this week really to look at practical implications of intergovernmental and what I would term intersectoral collaboration. So let me preface that with just sort of this background. And for those of you who have had me for a class before, I guess I apologize for being redundant. I'm about to say something that you've heard me say before. Um, that is this, that I think um, the United States of America has really developed as a nation with what I would call a mixed public-private partnership economy. And I think that goes way back. I think it goes back a lot further than people assert. Um, one of the eras that you've heard me talk about, and I talk about it because I think it's really strong historical evidence, um, is the Civil War era. When the Southern states seceded, whatever else we can say about the Civil War, when the Southern states seceded, that actually gave the Northern politicians, Lincoln and his political allies, really a lot of cover to do some of the things that the Republican Party had wanted to do. The nascent Republican Party had only been around since the 1850s. The first time the Republican Party ever nominated someone for president was John C. Fremont in 1856. Lincoln was only the second Republican nominee for president. And but the Republican Party had formed on the basis of this promise of free land, um, free labor, right? So what Lincoln did, in addition to fighting this horrific war, was he pushed for the Transcontinental Railroad. We would not have a Union Pacific Railroad today, this Fortune 500 company based here in Omaha, without the Trans-Pacific Railway Act. The Union Pacific was actually stood up by the Trans-Pacific Railway Act. The government guaranteed its indebtedness. The government gave the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, its counterpart building from California, land, uh, land rights and property rights in exchange for building this railroad. And so, these two railroads actually made a lot of money off of that. And it was a public-private partnership because there was no way that a government enterprise was going to build that railroad. Lincoln pushed for and got past the Homestead Act. A lot of your ancestors are homesteaders. My ancestors are homesteaders. But they were given 160 acres of free land um, to farm, basically to say, look, if you go settle in Nebraska or Kansas or the Dakotas or Wyoming or someplace like that, we'll give you 160 acres of land, and all you have to do is farm that land and build a residency within 5 years, and the land is yours. Well, it turns out, as we know, agriculture is a lot different now. Um, uh, some agriculture acquaintances of mine say, it takes about 700 acres really to farm a viable crop farm, a lot more to ranch a cattle ranch. And so farms have gotten bigger. But the start of agriculture in this part of the country, in the West, really was the Homestead Act, a public-private partnership. And we could go on. We could talk about the formation of the United States Department of Agriculture at the same time in 1862. And the role of the USDA was to actually advocate for those homesteaders, essentially, to advocate their product. So I could really even go farther back. It would be interesting to know what would happen if Alexander Hamilton had lived, if his life had not been cut short by, Aaron Burr, who was, among other things, uh, a person who was willing to be a traitor to the United States, if you read the history of Aaron Burr. But it would be interesting to know how many of Hamilton's ideas going forward would have been advocated even more had he lived. Things like a national bank. Hamilton really was in favor of more of a mercantilist economy, that is, advocating for the goods of the United States of America. Um, and that was his emphasis. So when we say that the idea that government just started to involve itself in economic issues in the New Deal in the 1930s, I think I think that's partially true. I just think it's incomplete. I think it's a fact that at the national level, government has grown extensively, exponentially, you might even say, since the New Deal and since the mid 1960s with the programs put in place by President Johnson. So we could point to those two eras and say, yeah, the national government has grown a lot bigger than it had been before. But I think that it's also true, as I talk about, that the partnership between the private sector and the public sector has been with us for a very long time, uh, not just since the New Deal. That's my argument. You're really welcome to take issue with that. I'm okay if people take issue with my arguments. Um, but what am I getting to here? Here's what I'm getting to. We live in 2019, right? And we know that we live in a very divisive political era. Um, Part of the problem, in my estimation, is that local newspapers have really declined. We have given way to a national media that sort of exhibits itself in cable news and also in uh, online news, really, um, online platforms, including social media platforms. And so our focus, really, as everyday humans, is on the national news, right? Um, you can go out. You could do this experiment, and polls have demonstrated what you would find. If you ask people who is the president of the United States, most would be able to say. Who are the senators from Nebraska? Most Nebraskans would be able to say. Uh, then ask what congressional district do you live in and who's your member of Congress? Fewer would know that. And then say, who's the mayor of the city? Yeah, probably a lot of people would know that. But ask, who's your council member? What school district are you in, and name one or two school board members from the school district that you live in. Who is your elected state representative or senator or both? In Nebraska, we just have one of those. But if you said it in Nebraska, what legislative district do you live in, and who's your state senator? A lot of people wouldn't know. And so we have this national media bias, which I'm not sure is healthy, because it makes us discuss political issues and disagreements as if they are all national, and they're not all national. And that leads directly to what we're talking about here in week 8. And there's this idea that local governments are this laboratory of democracy. And so that's what I really wanted to explore this week with the readings that we're getting at, and the discussion question that I'm asking you to respond to. So in the discussion question, I ask you to put yourself in the role of a local government leader and respond to the idea of collaboration. But let me just take one quick segue and talk about what's coming up in the course, just so we're all on the same page here. So this is week 8. In weeks 9, 10, and 11, so 9 through 11, I have these specialty tracks, right? So I won't have lectures during those weeks either, because you'll be divided up into different specialties. So what I ask you to do for each week is to pick a specialty, read the materials on that, and then respond within groups to that specialty. And so communicate with each other within that specialty track for those 3 weeks. So for 2 of those weeks, weeks 9 and 10, we're going to have a discussion board. And for the last week, week 11, that'll be your final journal. So that final journal really is going to summarize the specialty tracks in your mind, what you thought of that. We're going to come back together in week 12 for one final set of some light readings and a final discussion. Then the week after that, week 13, that's when your essay is due. So I've had a few emails from students on the essay. If you're really comfortable with the project, that's great. You don't have to reach out to me and discuss it. If you have questions, by all means, please do reach out to me and discuss the project. Again, this is sort of an essay with references. This is not an op-ed that you might get a chance to write for the local newspaper. They're not going to let you write 5 or 6 pages. They'll hold you to 1,000 words. But if you have questions about what we're talking about here, please do email me. I'll even sit down with you at the library if I get a chance, or elsewhere on campus or near campus. Just don't leave it to the last week. I mean, if you have questions, do it. So that's what's coming up. Okay, so week 8, real briefly. I have about five kind of sets of readings, and this is how I set them up, so you know. So first there's the reading from the S&H text, the Paddock reading, which is chapter 13. So this is kind of an interesting reading. It's kind of light reading. Here's why I chose this reading. Paddock uses 2 terms, collaboration and cooperation. So these are things going on at the local level, right? Collaboration and cooperation. They're variants of the same kind of theme, but they're not exactly alike. So one thing you have to sort out in your own mind is, okay, so what's the difference between collaboration and cooperation, right? So what does that mean to you? What I would say is that collaboration involves a little bit of peeling off your own authority and your own power of your organization and ceding it to a collaborative group. So that might mean ceding some of your budget. It might mean ceding some of your authority. It might mean, ceding your board of directors into sort of a collaborative board of directors, all the while maintaining your own ability to be accountable for what you're accountable for. On the other hand, cooperation really is just keeping your authority, keeping your funding intact, but cooperating with others in such a way that you can achieve a common goal. And so in one collaboration, I see a bit more merging of functions. And in the other, I see really organizations understanding what their particular roles are and understanding the particular roles of other organizations and then working together to make things happen, right? So that's an important idea to kind of wrap your mind around. The other one is the Paddock chapter itself talks about CPM projects. So just a pitch for the Certified Public Manager program, which is a national program. At UNO, we are the state of Nebraska host for the CPM program. And many of you know Ellen, and she runs that program. And that's a great program. And so I'm making a pitch for it here because if you work in a nonprofit or a government agency locally or in the state, and you have a chance to send one of your employees to the CPM program, fund them to do that for a year, I would highly encourage you to do that. People come up with great projects. And so the basis of that chapter are CPM projects. That's why I think it's kind of neat. So the second thing that I kind of set you up with is this reading by Perlman. These might not all be listed in this exact order, but Perlman is actually from a journal, but it's really a lead-in article for a special journal series. And in that article, Perlman interviews about 3 city managers and asks about their comments on another article. So you don't have to read that other article, but what I really want you to get at are their responses to the interview questions in this panel. So they talk about the article is entitled "Trust and Timing," which kind of gets to the heart of how local city managers might feel about collaboration. They happen to be talking about interlocal agreements, which are formal signed agreements, right? Interlocal agreements have formality. They are not necessarily more squishy collaboration. They're a formal article, a formal document, I should say, contractually based. Um, but what the look at the interview and how it focuses on relationships and the importance of relationships in successfully carrying out these kinds of interlocal agreements. So the third article is the Zemmering article, and that is more of a traditional kind of academic article study. And what Zemmering is looking at are the the factors that city managers, local government leaders actually look at when they enter into collaboration. A part of that article I'd really like you to focus on is Table 2. So Table 2 talks about um, the concerns of local government managers when they enter into collaboration. And what are they afraid of? Well, if you look at Table 2, what they are afraid of is actually chipping away at their own um, institutional, not just authority, but actually legal responsibility. So it's not an idea of you're taking away, my power. What they're concerned about is actually being able to protect the legal corporation, which is called their city, right? So, when we get into collaboration, we say things like, wouldn't it be great if all the cities in the Omaha area could just collaborate? Yeah, and they do to large extents, right? But the fact of the matter is that Omaha is a legal entity, Bellevue is a legal entity, Papillion is a legal entity, La Vista is a legal entity, Council Bluffs is a legal entity. So all these cities are legal entities which with responsibilities to the taxpayers and to the governments that form them, that is the states, to do certain things. And so city managers are paid to collaborate, I would say, but they're also paid to protect an institution, a legal institution of government. So look at that article and kind of draw on things like what are managers, what's their important role in protecting the institution while at the same time trying to collaborate with others. So that's Zemmering. Fourth is an ICMA article. If you're familiar with ICMA or you're not, um, look at their website. So I would say for those of you going into city government, local city government, ICMA is a really great institution, or I should say, organization to join. Dr. Blair, for a long time, has been sort of the faculty leader for students joining ICMA, and I would echo his effort. ICMA is a great organization to join if you're in local government. If for no other reason, they have just a lot of good references for people to use. Um, but ICMA talks about North Carolina as a as a case in law that has to do with collaboration. And then finally, I have about 3 references that have to do with Denver. And so what I'm talking about with Denver is what they call transportation-oriented development. So TOD. TOD is actually an effort that's going on in Denver. It's been going on for a few years to develop economic development nodes around essentially stations on the light rail line that Denver has built. It started out, building from the Denver airport, which is out in the prairie, to downtown Denver. And so they're trying to develop this transportation-oriented development mindset and scheme that is a collaborative effort between governments, so local governments, some state government, as well as for-profit enterprises like Panasonic, that's one of the cases, and people who are in the business of developing property. So that kind of brings me back about why I thought about doing the lecture this week while I was sitting at Exarban Village. Because I'm old enough to remember, I grew up in Omaha. I'm old enough to remember when Exarban, that about square mile of land there between the Papio Creek and about 62nd Street and between Center Street and Pacific Street was a racetrack, a gambling venue, right? Horse racing. So a lot of things happened that made horse racing a less popular kind of venue for people to gamble. Not the least of which is it's very expensive to own and train horses versus owning and training a slot machine. So, you can do the math and figure out pretty quick that if you want people to gamble, horse racing is really expensive. So it went defunct, essentially. Um, and so the question was, what are we going to do with this chunk of land? Well, Douglas County assumed that chunk of land. That was the impetus for Exarban Village becoming really what it is today, a mixed use public private uh, land area. So the mixed use is there's government, that is the University of Nebraska at Omaha. There's for profit kinds of businesses, some big, some small, right? And that's what they want. They want some big businesses like HDR to be there, and Pacific Life and Blue Cross. And they want small businesses. They want the Dudleys, and they want the Jones Brothers. They want those kinds of businesses there as well. And so if you go to Exarban Village, you know that it's really kind of a popular destination in Omaha. And you know, you would look at it and say, hey, this has been really successful. And so we go back to this idea of local government, right? Or not just local government, but living in a city as this laboratory of democracy or laboratory of innovation. And so what do we see? We see people sort of their partisan beliefs turn out to be not as important um, at the local level in many ways. Now, is that good or is that bad? I'm not sure, but what it seems to be is a reality that a lot of local development seems more collaborative than what we seem to be doing at the state level and certainly the national level, right? So that's where we're going this week. Um, Take the time to look at those readings and develop your answer to the question that I pose. And then you have to look forward to the last 4 weeks of the course, 5 weeks of the course, where we go into the specialties, have one wrap up question, and then wrap it up with your essay. Again, get back with me if you have questions on your essay, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.